Yesterday's Supreme Court chamber witnessed something unprecedented that left Chief Justice John Roberts visibly shaken and furious. Meanwhile, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's calculated response created internet history and sparked a nationwide conversation. Within moments, what began as a standard congressional testimony transformed into the year's most shocking political showdown. What Jasmine delivered next will leave you speechless. Before we explore this remarkable confrontation, please hit the like button if you're ready to witness how one fearless Congresswoman just rewrote the rules of American political discourse. Don't forget to subscribe because the upcoming developments will absolutely astound you. The nation's highest court chamber, traditionally known for its solemn atmosphere and quiet legal discussions, erupted into unprecedented chaos when Chief Justice Roberts accomplished something never before seen in American judicial history. He completely lost his composure, not merely elevated his voice, but genuinely erupted at a sitting congressional representative during live broadcast coverage, his complexion shifting to deep crimson as every camera documented the moment. However, Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old first-term representative from Texas, remained utterly composed. What followed sent tremors throughout Washington's political establishment and transformed her into an international phenomenon overnight. Her comeback was so precisely calculated and utterly devastating that number Jasmine Clapback immediately dominated global social media trends while Roberts desperately attempted damage control. This transcended typical political theater. This marked the moment when America's traditional power structure encountered an unstoppable force in a young African-American woman who absolutely refused intimidation. What you're about to witness demonstrates precisely why the political establishment fears leaders like Jasmine Crockett. Understanding why this confrontation shocked America requires knowing these two pivotal figures and recognizing why this collision was destined to happen. Chief Justice John Roberts, age 70, has commanded America's supreme judicial body for almost 20 years. Selected by President George W. Bush in 2005, Roberts meticulously built his reputation as the institutional guardian, the reliable leader safeguarding the court's standing while rendering decisions that influence American jurisprudence across generations. His immaculate silver hair and deliberate speaking style embody traditional American authority structures. Caucasian, elite university graduate, completely certain of his elevated position. Yet beneath that controlled facade exists something more troubling. Roberts has overseen numerous highly contentious rulings in contemporary Supreme Court history. He dismantled voting rights safeguards, permitted unlimited corporate political spending, and silently observed as his court became the most politically divided and publicly distrusted in recent memory. Critics argue he functions more as politician than jurist, prioritizing power over justice. Conversely, Jasmine Crockett represents everything the establishment desperately wants to silence. At 43, she's considered young by Washington's standards. As an African-American woman from Dallas, she possesses real-world experience most colleagues cannot comprehend. Before entering Congress, she practiced criminal defense law, advocating for ordinary citizens against systems designed to oppress them. She's brilliant, courageous, and completely rejects the unspoken protocols that typically keep people like her subdued and appreciative. Crockett gained national attention during her freshman congressional term through communication that combines legal expertise, social media intelligence, and justified outrage that connects with millions of forgotten Americans. She avoids political doublespeak, delivering truth even when it disturbs powerful individuals. This approach directly led to their inevitable confrontation. The Supreme Court had recently issued a decision effectively eliminating federal reproductive rights protections for minors. Roberts, authoring the majority opinion, employed language critics deemed heartless and disconnected. This ruling would compel pregnant teenagers to continue unwanted pregnancies regardless of circumstances, including rape or incest, unless individual states provided specific exceptions. Congress convened emergency hearings regarding this ruling, inviting Crockett to provide testimony. Nobody anticipated Roberts personally appearing, claiming necessity to defend institutional court integrity against congressional criticism. Roberts' presence in that hearing room immediately signaled explosive developments ahead. Chief Justices rarely appear before Congress, never to justify controversial decisions. His attendance conveyed an unmistakable message. The court was finished accepting criticism, and he intended to establish congressional boundaries. Crockett, positioned at the witness table, wearing a sharp burgundy blazer with her natural hair styled professionally, observed Roberts' entrance with the composed demeanor of a defense attorney preparing to demolish the prosecution's argument. She came ready for battle, unaware Roberts was about to provide her career's greatest political triumph. The implications were enormous. This wasn't simply about one Supreme Court decision. This concerned whether America's highest court could continue operating without accountability to affected citizens, whether an African-American congresswoman would be permitted to speak truth to authority, or if the traditional power network would force her back into silence. Roberts believed his reputation and position would intimidate this freshman representative. He was about to discover that Jasmine Crockett doesn't intimidate easily. Tension filled the hearing room from Roberts' first moment at the witness table. Committee Chairman Jim Jordan insisted Roberts receive appropriate respect as Chief Justice, but Crockett made clear she would pose identical challenging questions she'd ask any witness. Initial exchanges remained relatively civilized, with Roberts delivering standard responses about judicial independence and constitutional interpretation. However, frustration was visibly building on both sides. Roberts clearly expected gentle questioning and respectful deference. Crockett treated him like any witness whose decisions affected people's lives. Roberts' composure first cracked when Crockett questioned the court's declining public approval ratings. "Chief Justice Roberts," she stated, her voice remaining steady and professional, "recent polling indicates the Supreme Court maintains the lowest approval rating in modern history. Do you believe this might connect to decisions appearing more political than legal?" Roberts' jaw tensed noticeably. "Congresswoman, the court doesn't base decisions on polling data. We interpret the Constitution as written, not as politicians might prefer." "I understand that's your stated position," Crockett responded smoothly. "However, when your constitutional interpretation consistently aligns perfectly with Republican Party positions on reproductive rights, voting access, and corporate influence, surely you understand why citizens might question that coincidence." The room atmosphere shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the respectful deference Roberts anticipated. Committee Republicans attempted intervention, but Crockett remained within time limits and parliamentary procedures. She followed protocol flawlessly while systematically dismantling Roberts' prepared talking points. Roberts' voice grew notably sharper. "Congresswoman, I would warn against questioning the integrity of this court or its justices. We remain bound by law and precedent, not political pressure." That's when Crockett smiled. Not warmly, but with the calculated expression of a prosecutor preparing to deliver a crushing blow. "Chief Justice, let's discuss precedent. Your recent ruling eliminating reproductive protections for minors. How exactly does this align with precedent regarding children's welfare protection?" The question struck like lightning. Roberts' face flushed crimson, and his carefully maintained demeanor finally shattered. "That's a complete mischaracterization of our ruling," he snapped, voice rising dramatically. "The court simply returned this issue to states where it constitutionally belongs." "Returned it to the states," Crockett repeated, her voice filled with controlled skepticism. "So when a 14-year-old rape victim in Texas cannot access medical care because your ruling authorized states to deny it, that represents constitutional justice? When children are forced to carry their attacker's baby because of your decision, that's what you call justice?" The room exploded. Republicans shouted about procedure and proper decorum. Democrats leaned forward, sensing vulnerability. but every eye focused on Roberts, whose face now blazed bright red, his hands gripping the table so forcefully his knuckles turned white. "Congresswoman Crockett," Roberts said, his voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "You are clearly beyond your depth discussing constitutional law. Perhaps you should leave complex legal matters to those who actually comprehend them." The insult lingered like poison gas. The condescension was staggering. A white male authority figure essentially declaring a successful African-American female attorney intellectually inadequate to understand law. Everyone present understood the ugly historical context behind such dismissal. But Crockett didn't respond with anger. Instead, she leaned back calmly, that calculated smile returning. "Chief Justice, I'm curious about your definition of legal comprehension. I spent years as a criminal defense attorney actually practicing law in courtrooms, fighting for real people facing real consequences. How many actual courtroom trials have you personally handled?" Roberts' face shifted from crimson to purple. He knew exactly where this was heading and couldn't prevent it. As Chief Justice, his experience was primarily academic and administrative. Crockett possessed actual trial experience, real clients, real victories in real courtrooms. "The Chief Justice's role differs from," Roberts began, but Crockett smoothly interrupted. "Different, certainly. More experienced? That's questionable. But let's return to the children your ruling will impact. Chief Justice, do you have daughters?" "I fail to see how my family relates to—" "You have 2 daughters, both adopted, which demonstrates wonderful compassion. Now imagine one of them at 14 became pregnant following rape. Under your ruling, depending on her state of residence, she might be compelled to carry that pregnancy to term. How would that make you feel?" The room fell completely silent. Roberts's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. The question was devastating because it was personal, specific, and completely unanswerable without either admitting the ruling's cruelty or appearing hypocritical. "The court's decisions are based on constitutional interpretation, not personal emotions," Roberts finally managed, his voice now noticeably unsteady. "Personal emotions," Crockett repeated softly. "So concerning your daughters, it would involve personal emotions. But regarding other people's daughters, especially poor daughters, black daughters, Hispanic daughters, then it's merely constitutional interpretation." That's when Roberts completely lost control. The careful mask of judicial temperament he'd maintained for 2 decades finally shattered. What emerged was ugly, raw, and utterly damaging. What happened next will be analyzed in political science courses for generations. Chief Justice John Roberts, the man who prided himself on institutional dignity and judicial composure, completely melted down on live television. "How dare you!" Roberts exploded, shooting up from his chair so violently it nearly overturned. His face now displayed a mottled purple-red, neck veins bulging as he pointed a shaking finger directly at Crockett. "How dare you drag my family into this? You are an embarrassment to this institution. You are an embarrassment to Congress." The room descended into chaos. Committee members were yelling. Camera flashes erupted. Security moved closer to the witness table. Throughout it all, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly motionless, hands folded serenely in her lap, observing the Chief Justice of the United States having a complete breakdown. "You think you can march in here with your grandstanding and social media stunts and attack the nation's highest court?" Roberts continued screaming, saliva flying from his mouth. "You lack the experience. You lack the intellect. You lack the authority." Every word was being broadcast live on C-SPAN, CNN, Fox News, and streaming platforms worldwide. Millions witnessed the Chief Justice of the United States losing his mind at an African-American congresswoman who had simply asked tough questions about his own decisions. But Roberts wasn't finished. In his rage, he spoke the words that would destroy his career. Maybe if you spent more time studying law and less time performing for cameras, you'd understand how government actually functions. But I suppose that's expecting too much from someone like you. Someone like you. The phrase exploded like a nuclear bomb. Everyone in that room understood exactly what he meant. Someone like you. Young, black, female, uppity, not knowing her place. It contained every racist, sexist dog whistle wrapped in one supposedly respectful phrase. The hearing room fell absolutely silent. Even Republicans appeared shocked at what their Chief Justice had just declared on live television. Chairman Jordan frantically signaled for recess, but it was too late. The damage was complete. Throughout it all, Jasmine Crockett hadn't moved. She sat there perfectly composed, watching Roberts' career implode in real time. When the screaming finally ended and Roberts stood there breathing heavily, his expensive suit wrinkled and hair disheveled, Crockett slowly leaned toward her microphone. Her voice, when it came, was soft, controlled, and absolutely devastating. "Chief Justice Roberts," she said, her tone as calm as discussing weather, "I want to thank you for that response because you just proved every point I was attempting to make." Roberts, still standing, opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett continued in that same unnaturally calm voice. "You see, for 20 minutes I asked substantive questions about your legal decisions and their real-world consequences. Questions any appellate attorney might ask. Questions any constitutional law professor might ask. Questions any concerned citizen should be allowed to ask." She paused, letting that settle. "And your response was to scream at me, question my intelligence, and suggest that someone like me doesn't belong here. Chief Justice, you just demonstrated exactly why Americans have lost faith in the Supreme Court." Roberts attempted to interrupt, but Crockett's voice cut through his effort like a blade. "You couldn't defend your decisions on their merits, so you attacked me personally. You couldn't justify the consequences of your rulings, so you questioned my qualifications. And when pressed about real children who will suffer real harm from your choices, you had a tantrum that would embarrass a toddler." The cameras captured every word, every gesture, every devastating pause. Social media was already exploding with clips of Roberts' meltdown and Crockett's response. "Chief Justice, you asked about my qualifications. Let me remind you, I graduated summa cum laude from law school. I've won cases in state and federal courts. I've represented hundreds of clients, including children, in exactly the situations your ruling will create. I've been elected by the people to represent them in Congress." Another pause. This one even more devastating than the last. "Your qualifications for your position? You were appointed by a president who lost the popular vote and confirmed by senators representing a minority of Americans. You've never tried a case. You've never represented a scared teenager. You've never had to explain to a rape victim why the law won't protect her." Roberts was visibly shaking now, whether from rage or humiliation, impossible to determine. "So when you ask if I understand how government works, here's my answer. Yes, I do. I understand that in a democracy, even Supreme Court justices are supposed to be accountable to the people they serve. I understand that no one, not even you, is above questioning when your decisions affect real lives." She leaned even closer to the microphone, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but every word audible in the silent room. "And I understand that when someone in power can't handle being questioned by a black woman, that tells us everything we need to know about both their character and their qualifications." The final blow was delivered with surgical precision. "Chief Justice Roberts, thank you for showing America exactly who you really are. I yield back my time." With that, Jasmine Crockett leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and waited. Robert stood there for several more seconds, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, before finally collapsing back into his chair. His face had gone from purple to gray, and his hands were visibly trembling. Committee Chairman Jordan called for immediate recess, but it didn't matter. The damage was complete. In less than 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had systematically destroyed the reputation of the Chief Justice of the United States using nothing but his own words and behavior. The aftermath was immediate and devastating for Roberts. Roberts' rage and Jasmine Clapback were trending worldwide within minutes. The clip of him screaming, "Someone like you," was being shared millions of times hourly. Legal scholars were demanding his resignation. Even conservative commentators struggled to defend his behavior. But for Jasmine Crockett, this was just another day standing up for what's right. As she gathered her papers and prepared to leave the hearing room, she looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had just changed American politics forever and wasn't even slightly surprised that she'd won. The explosion following the Roberts-Crockett confrontation wasn't merely political. It was seismic, reshaping American discourse about power, accountability, and who gets to question authority in the United States. Within 30 minutes of the hearing's conclusion, social media erupted into 2025's biggest political firestorm. Roberts' rage accumulated over 2.3 million tweets in the first hour alone. The video of Roberts screaming, "Someone like you," was shared 847,000 times on Twitter, 1.2 million times on TikTok, and became C-SPAN's most watched clip in network history. But it wasn't just the quantity of responses, it was the quality and diversity. Political figures across the spectrum weighed in, and reactions revealed deep fractures in how Americans view authority and accountability. Progressive leaders rallied behind Crockett immediately. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted within minutes, "This is what happens when you question power with facts instead of deference. Jasmine Crockett showed America what real leadership looks like." The tweet received 340,000 likes in 2 hours. Senator Bernie Sanders was more direct. "Chief Justice Roberts' disgraceful outburst shows exactly why we need Supreme Court reform. No one is above accountability, especially when children's lives are at stake." But perhaps the most powerful support came from an unexpected source. Retired Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who at 95 rarely makes public statements, released a brief comment through her foundation that was devastating. "In 50 years of public service, I have never witnessed such an inappropriate display of temperament from any judicial officer. The court's dignity demands better." Republican reactions were more complicated and revealed significant cracks in conservative unity. Traditional conservatives were horrified by Roberts' behavior, even if they disagreed with Crockett's politics. Senator Susan Collins called the outburst deeply concerning and suggested Roberts should issue a public apology. But the Trump wing of the party saw an opportunity. They had always viewed Roberts as insufficiently conservative, and his meltdown gave them permission to attack him openly. Tucker Carlson spent an entire segment arguing that Roberts finally showed his true colors, an entitled establishment figure who can't handle being questioned by someone who actually represents the people. The legal community's response was swift and brutal. The American Bar Association issued an unprecedented statement expressing grave concern about the Chief Justice's departure from judicial temperament. Harvard Law School, Roberts' alma mater, announced they would be reviewing his honorary positions. More damaging were responses from individual legal scholars. Professor Lawrence Tribe tweeted, "In 40 years of constitutional law, I've never seen anything like this. Roberts has irreparably damaged the court's credibility." Conservative legal scholar Stephen Calabrese wrote in the Wall Street Journal, "The Chief Justice's behavior was inexcusable and has set back the cause of judicial authority by decades." International reaction was equally damning. The BBC ran the confrontation as their lead story with the headline, "U.S. Chief Justice's Racist Outburst Shocks World." Le Monde called it, "The day American justice lost its dignity." Even allies struggled to defend American institutions. But the most telling responses came from ordinary Americans, and they revealed a country hungry for leaders who would actually fight for them. Maria Gonzalez, a teacher from Phoenix, posted a TikTok that went viral. "I watched that whole thing with my teenage daughter. When that old man started screaming at Congresswoman Crockett, my daughter said, "Mom, she's not backing down. That's the kind of leader we need, someone who fights for us instead of fighting for the system." David Williams, a veteran from Ohio, wrote on Facebook, "I'm a Republican, but Roberts was wrong. You don't scream at a woman doing her job just because you don't like her questions. Crockett handled that like a professional. He acted like a child." The economic impact was immediate and surprising. Crockett's campaign received over $2.3 million in donations in 48 hours, mostly in small amounts from people who had never donated to political campaigns before. Her speech defending her response was viewed 23 million times across all platforms. Meanwhile, Chief Justice Roberts faced calls for resignation from multiple quarters. A petition on change.org demanding his resignation collected 890,000 signatures in 3 days. More seriously, several Democratic senators announced they would be introducing legislation to reform the Supreme Court, with Roberts' behavior as Exhibit A for why change was needed. The legal implications were profound. Several pending cases before the Supreme Court suddenly faced new scrutiny about whether Roberts could fairly adjudicate them, given his obvious political biases. Civil rights organizations announced they would be filing motions for his recusal in any case involving racial or gender discrimination. Perhaps most damaging for Roberts, his outburst gave legitimacy to long-standing criticisms of the court's political nature. For years, legal scholars had argued that the Supreme Court operated more like a partisan political body than a neutral judicial institution. Roberts had always insisted otherwise, positioning himself as an institutionalist, protecting the court's dignity. But his screaming fit at a black congresswoman made those arguments impossible to maintain. Professor Melissa Murray of New York University Law School put it perfectly. Roberts spent 20 years building a reputation as the institutionalist Chief Justice. He destroyed it in 5 minutes of pure, unveiled bias. The political ramifications extended far beyond one confrontation. Democratic strategists immediately began using the incident to argue for Supreme Court expansion and reform. "This is what happens when you give lifetime appointments to politicians in robes," became a rallying cry for progressive activists. More importantly, the confrontation changed how Americans viewed both figures involved. Roberts, who had carefully crafted an image as a thoughtful, temperate jurist, was now seen as just another angry white man who couldn't handle being questioned by a black woman. His authority was permanently damaged. Crockett, meanwhile, had become a national political star overnight. Speaking requests poured in from universities, civil rights organizations, and political groups. Publishing companies offered book deals. Netflix reached out about documentary projects. But Crockett's response to her newfound fame was typically focused on substance over celebrity. In a press conference 2 days after the confrontation, she addressed the attention directly. "I didn't go into that hearing room to become famous. I went there to ask necessary questions about decisions that affect real people's lives. If my willingness to do that job makes some people uncomfortable, that says more about them than it does about me." She continued, "Chief Justice Roberts called me someone like me, as if that were an insult. He's right. I am someone like me. I'm someone who came from a working family, someone who put herself through law school, someone who represented clients who couldn't afford fancy lawyers, someone who was elected by people who wanted their voices heard in Washington. If that threatens powerful people, good. It should." The confrontation also sparked broader conversations about race, gender, and power in American institutions. Young women of color across the country saw Crockett's performance as proof that they belonged in spaces of power, regardless of who tried to intimidate them. "Someone like me" became a rallying cry, with thousands of women sharing their own stories of being dismissed or diminished in professional settings. The hashtag became a movement, with women running for office, applying for promotions, and speaking up in meetings with new confidence. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was on the Supreme Court itself. Roberts's outburst had revealed the ugly truth that many Americans suspected but couldn't prove, that the court's decisions were driven more by political bias than legal reasoning. Public trust in the court, already at historic lows, collapsed completely. Polling showed that only 23% of Americans believed the Supreme Court was impartial, down from 37% before the confrontation. More damaging, 67% of Americans now supported major reforms to the court, including term limits for justices. The incident also energized judicial reform movements at the state level. Several states announced they would be reviewing their own judicial selection processes, with many citing Roberts' behavior as evidence that lifetime appointments created accountability problems. The corporate world also took notice. Major law firms quietly began distancing themselves from Roberts, with several prestigious firms removing him from their advisory boards. Corporate clients started questioning whether cases argued before Roberts could be considered fairly decided, given his obvious capacity for personal bias. Entertainment industry figures jumped into the conversation as well. Oprah Winfrey tweeted, "Watching Jasmine Crockett handle that situation with such grace and power reminded me why representation matters. When we see ourselves in positions of authority, everything changes." The tweet was retweeted over 400,000 times. Late-night television had a field day with the confrontation. Stephen Colbert's monologue about Chief Justice Karen went viral, while Trevor Noah's impression of Roberts' tantrum became an instant classic. Saturday Night Live dedicated an entire cold open to the incident, with their Roberts character throwing an increasingly ridiculous tantrum, while their Crockett character remained perfectly composed throughout. The international legal community weighed in as well. The International Court of Justice issued a rare statement expressing concern about judicial temperament standards in democratic societies. Legal organizations from Canada to Germany cited the incident as an example of why judicial accountability mechanisms were essential. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Roberts issued a carefully worded public statement expressing regret for his unfortunate choice of words and reaffirming his commitment to judicial temperament. But the damage was done. Legal observers noted that Roberts avoided actually apologizing and continued to defend the substance of his positions. Behind the scenes, sources revealed that several Supreme Court justices had privately expressed dismay at Roberts' behavior. Justice Elena Kagan reportedly told colleagues that Roberts had set back judicial credibility by decades. Even conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch was said to be deeply troubled by the Chief Justice's loss of composure. The Federal Judicial Center, responsible for training federal judges, announced they would be implementing new mandatory training on appropriate responses to congressional oversight, a clear response to Roberts' meltdown. Legal ethics professors began using the confrontation as a prime example of how not to handle criticism in their courses. Crockett's response to Roberts' statement was characteristically direct. Actions matter more than words. If the Chief Justice truly regrets his behavior, he should recuse himself from cases involving the rights of people he's demonstrated bias against. Otherwise, this is just damage control. The story continued to evolve with new developments emerging weekly. Ethics complaints were filed against Roberts with the Judicial Conduct Board. Law schools began incorporating the confrontation into their curricula as an example of how not to handle judicial criticism. Most importantly, the confrontation had changed the rules of engagement between Congress and the Supreme Court. Never again would justices be able to expect automatic deference simply because of their positions. Crockett had proven that thoughtful, persistent questioning could expose the political nature of supposedly neutral judicial decisions. The incident became a case study in how power dynamics can shift in an instant when someone refuses to accept their assigned role. Roberts expected Crockett to be deferential and grateful for the opportunity to question him. Instead, she treated him like what he was, a public servant whose decisions affected millions of lives. In doing so, she didn't just win a political confrontation. She changed how Americans think about accountability, authority, And who gets to ask the tough questions in a democracy? 6 months later, as calls for Roberts' resignation continued and Crockett's influence in Congress grew, the lesson was clear. In American democracy, no one is too powerful to be questioned, and no one is too young, too black, or too female to do the questioning. The video of their confrontation remained one of the most watched political clips of all time, shared millions of times with captions like, "This is what courage looks like," and "Never let them intimidate you." The confrontation also sparked unexpected conversations in unlikely places. Corporate boardrooms began discussing Crockett moments, instances where junior employees effectively challenge senior leadership with facts and preparation. Business schools started incorporating the exchange into leadership courses, analyzing how Crockett's calm professionalism under attack demonstrated superior executive presence compared to Roberts' emotional volatility. Religious communities were divided but largely supportive of Crockett's approach. The National Baptist Convention praised her Christ-like composure under persecution, while progressive Catholic groups noted how her defense of vulnerable children aligned with core Christian values. Even some conservative evangelical leaders privately admitted that Roberts' behavior was ungodly and unbecoming of a Christian leader. Youth engagement in politics surged dramatically after the confrontation. Voter registration among 18 to 25-year-olds increased by 340% in the month following the incident, with many citing Crockett's example as inspiration to get involved in democracy. But for Jasmine Crockett, it was just Tuesday. She had more questions to ask, more fights to fight, and more powerful people to hold accountable. Because that's what someone like her does. She shows up, speaks truth, and refuses to back down. And America was watching, learning, and demanding more leaders exactly like her. If this story of courage and accountability inspired you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible political moments that are reshaping America. Because when leaders like Jasmine Crockett stand up to power, we all win. Hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next in the fight for real democracy.